I never thought parking a car in my own driveway would lead to one of the most shocking experiences of my life. But when you live in a neighborhood run by a power-hungry HOA, even the smallest things can turn into a full-blown war. And in my case, the war started with my Jeep. My Jeep wasn't just any ordinary vehicle. It was part of a task force program I was volunteering for, supporting local police investigations. It wasn't marked like a patrol car, but it was equipped with surveillance, equipment, trackers, and communication tools that made it far more than just a car. To anyone else, though, it just looked like a regular black Jeep, with dark-tinted windows and a sturdy lock on the steering wheel for extra security. The steering wheel lock was necessary because of the equipment inside. I couldn't take any chances of someone breaking in. And on top of that, I had parked it in my driveway, not the street, not someone else's property, but right in front of my own house. I thought that would be the safest spot, but apparently, my neighbor Karen, yes, the classic HOA Karen, had other ideas. She was the type who would march around with a clipboard, snapping photos of people's lawns, measuring the length of their grass, and sending emails about violations that nobody else cared about. She thrived on conflict, and she loved making people's lives harder, all under the excuse of protecting property values. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Karen pacing in front of my Jeep, hands on her hips, glaring at it like it had personally insulted her. I didn't think much of it. I was used to her antics, but what I didn't know then was that Karen had already made up her mind. She wanted my Jeep gone, and she was willing to do something outrageous to make that happen. The next morning I walked outside and froze. My steering wheel lock had been cut clean through, the metal edges jagged and bent. My Jeep door was slightly open, like someone had been trying to get inside, and there she was, Karen, standing proudly next to it with a pair of bolt cutters. In her hand, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. My first reaction was shock, my second was anger, and my third was fear, not for myself, but for her. She had no idea what she had just messed with. The Jeep wasn't just my personal car, it was equipped with sensitive police equipment, and tampering with it was a huge deal. If she had managed to actually drive it away, she would have been stealing government property without even realizing it. Karen noticed me standing there and immediately launched into her tirade. She waved the bolt cutters in the air like a trophy, bragging that she was enforcing the HOA rules. According to her, my Jeep was too much of an eyesore for the neighborhood and violated the aesthetics of the community. She said SUVs and Jeeps weren't appropriate for driveways and needed to be kept in a garage, never mind the fact that half the neighborhood had pickup trucks sitting in theirs. I didn't argue with her. At that moment, I didn't need to, because what she didn't know was that the Jeep had cameras installed inside, hidden high-quality surveillance cameras that had captured her every move. From the moment she approached it with the bolt cutters to the second she tried pulling the lock off the steering wheel, I calmly walked back inside my house, grabbed my phone, and made a call. Within minutes, 2 unmarked police cars rolled into the neighborhood. Officers stepped out, walked straight to Karen, and asked her to drop the bolt cutters. Her smug expression vanished instantly. She tried to argue, claiming she was just protecting the neighborhood, but the officers weren't buying it. What happened next was something I'll never forget. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was placed in handcuffs right in front of her perfectly trimmed hedges. Neighbors peeked out their windows, some even stepping outside to see what the commotion was about. For once, Karen wasn't the one calling out violations, she was the one being called out. The police explained to her, very clearly, that the Jeep belonged to a task force and was considered government property. By cutting the lock and attempting to tamper with it, she had crossed a serious line. It wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was a potential federal crime. Karen's face went pale. She stammered, insisting she didn't know, that she thought it was just my personal car. But ignorance wasn't an excuse. The cameras had her on tape, and the cut lock was all the evidence anyone needed. She was taken down to the station for questioning, and I thought that would be the end of it. But of course, with Karen, nothing is ever simple. The very next week, the HOA board sent me an official notice. They claimed that Karen had been acting in good faith, and that my Jeep was still in violation of the community's rules. They demanded I either park it in my garage or move it off-site entirely. At this point, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Not only had Karen broken the law, but the HOA was actually defending her actions. It was clear they were more concerned with protecting their own image than admitting one of their board members had gone way too far. But I had something they didn't, the law on my side. I forwarded the notice straight to the task force coordinator, and within days, the HOA received a very official letter warning them to back off. The letter made it clear that the Jeep was authorized, that it was not subject to HOA interference, and that any further attempts to tamper with it would result in legal consequences. The HOA went silent after that. No more notices, no more threats, no more Karen parading around with her clipboard. She returned home from her legal troubles, looking much less confident than before, and though she still strutted around the neighborhood from time to time, the power she once had was gone. Neighbors who had always been too afraid to stand up to her finally felt emboldened. People began speaking out about the petty fines and harassment they had endured. It turned out Karen had been bullying nearly everyone in the neighborhood, and my Jeep incident was the final straw. Eventually, a petition circulated to remove her from the HOA board, and it passed overwhelmingly. Karen lost her position, her influence, and her reputation all at once. As for me, I still park my Jeep in the same driveway. The lock has been replaced, the cameras are still rolling, and every time I see Karen walk by, she avoids eye contact. She knows exactly what she did, and she knows she'll never be able to intimidate me again. Looking back, I realize how easily things could have spiraled out of control. If she had actually managed to move the Jeep, if she had tampered with the equipment inside, the consequences for her would have been far worse. But in the end, justice was served in the most fitting way possible. The self-proclaimed HOA enforcer ended up being the one exposed, punished, and stripped of her authority. And me. I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people dig their own hole. Because Karen dug hers deeper than I ever could have. But Karen's story doesn't end with her removal from the HOA board. 3 months later, just as life was getting back to normal, she made one last desperate attempt to reclaim her power. This time her plan was more calculated, more sinister, and ultimately, more stupid than anything she'd done before. It started when I noticed Karen taking pictures of my Jeep again. Not openly like before, but sneaking around at odd hours with her phone, trying to be discreet. At first, I thought she was just being her usual paranoid self, but then the anonymous letters started appearing in neighbors' mailboxes. The letters claimed I was running an illegal surveillance operation that was spying on families and children. They accused me of violating everyone's privacy and suggested that my police connections were fabricated. Karen had crafted these letters to look official, complete with fake legal letterhead and warnings about government overreach. What made it worse was that some of the newer residents who hadn't witnessed the original incident started believing her. I began noticing suspicious glances and hushed conversations when I walked by. Parents started pulling their children indoors. When they saw me coming, the community that had finally found peace was being torn apart again by Karen's lies. But Karen made a critical mistake. She targeted Mrs. Henderson, but Mrs. Henderson was the sweet elderly widow who lived across the street. For me, she was the type of neighbor who brought cookies to new residents and remembered everyone's birthdays. Karen apparently thought she'd be an easy target for her conspiracy theories. What Karen didn't know was that Mrs. Henderson's late husband had been a police detective for 30 years. She could spot manipulation from a mile away, and she was not about to let some bitter woman destroy our neighborhood with lies. When Karen approached her with a surveillance conspiracy theory, Mrs. Henderson played along perfectly. She nodded sympathetically, asked all the right questions, and even agreed to help expose me. Karen was so excited to have an ally that she revealed her entire plan, how she'd been creating the anonymous letters, how she intended to contact local media, and how she planned to file false police reports about illegal surveillance equipment. What Karen didn't realize was that Mrs. Henderson had been recording the entire conversation on her smartphone. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and a recording that would end Karen's harassment campaign forever. That woman picked the wrong house for her nonsense, Mrs. Henderson said with a mischievous smile. My Harold always said the best way to catch a liar is to let them keep talking. And honey, she sure did talk. As I listened to the recording, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen had not only admitted to the letter campaign, but had also detailed plans for filing false police reports and contacting news stations with fabricated stories. She'd essentially confessed to harassment, defamation, and conspiracy to file false reports, all while thinking she was recruiting an accomplice. I immediately contacted my task force coordinator, who forwarded the recording to the appropriate authorities. Within 48 hours, Karen found herself facing real legal consequences for her actions. But the best part came when Mrs. Henderson suggested we play the recording at the next neighborhood association meeting. The community center was packed that evening, with nearly every resident in attendance after hearing rumors about Karen's latest scheme. When Mrs. Henderson pressed play, the room fell completely silent. Karen's voice filled the space, bragging about her letter campaign and plotting to file false police reports. When the recording ended, you could have heard a pin drop. Then the floodgates opened. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared their own stories about Karen's harassment over the years. The family found 4 children's toys in their yard. The couple threatened over their mailbox color. The man reported for parking his work truck in his own driveway. It became clear that Karen hadn't just been targeting me, she'd been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years. My situation was simply the final straw that gave everyone permission to speak up. By the end of the meeting, the community had voted unanimously to pursue legal action against Karen for her harassment campaign. More importantly, they'd found their collective voice and refused to be bullied anymore. Karen's revenge plot had backfired spectacularly. Instead of turning the neighborhood against me, she'd united everyone against her. The anonymous letter stopped immediately. The suspicious glances disappeared. The false reports were never filed. 3 weeks later, Karen quietly put her house up for sale and moved away. She couldn't face the daily reminder of her spectacular failure, and frankly, nobody was sorry to see her go. The house sold quickly to a lovely young couple with twin toddlers. On moving day, I helped them carry boxes while their kids played in the same driveway where Karen had once stood with bolt cutters, trying to destroy what she couldn't control. My Jeep still sits in that driveway, cameras still recording, lock still secure. But now it's not just my vehicle, it's become a symbol of what happens when a community stands up to bullies. Neighbors joke about having their own security detail, and kids wave at it when they ride their bikes past Mrs. Henderson. Now in her mid-80s, has become the neighborhood's unofficial leader. She organizes monthly coffee and truth gatherings, where residents can address concerns openly and honestly. Property values have actually increased as word spread about our supportive, tight-knit community. Sometimes I drive past Karen's old house and remember the chaos she caused, but mostly, I'm grateful for how it all turned out. Her attempts to tear us apart only made us stronger. Her lies were exposed by truth. Her harassment was defeated by unity. The war is over, and everybody won, everybody except Karen. And sometimes, that's exactly the ending a story needs.